Welcome to iNN's Headline News and Beyond Headlines and Beyond for April 4th, 2012. We're going to continue on with the path that we've been taking since yesterday. Our new path of looking at a lot of the science behind the politics, the going deeper into the political understanding, the historical understanding, and the science behind a lot of the events that you see in the headlines. And today, I've got an alignment of things. And if you're watching on the domestic news, you see that more often than not they talk about the Constitution and they talk about fairness. Typically, Obama and the Democrats on the left, the social left, they're talking about the need for everyone to be fair, that they're trying to help out the poor person, and that they're there to help out the small guy, the little guy. They're there to help out those who can't help themselves. When you look at Obama's record, and you look at the record of socialism in history, this has never been the case. Socialism has never actually helped the little guy. What it's done is it's entrenched and segregated societies. It created class warfare. It created class divisions, and it actually, because what it does, it cements the divisions by saying that, well, the small guy needs government help, but because he needs help, until we think he's ready to stand up on his own, we'll never let him go. He'll always have to be under government help. And of course, most of these government people who are working in these fields, they want to keep their jobs. They like the salaries they receive. So these people, in the assessment of these bureaucrats, never achieve the level of competence needed by these bureaucrats in order to be self-sufficient. So you end up with an entire class of people, an entire segment of society who become these dependents on welfare. These is what we call a welfare state, and they become totally and fully dependent on the state for everything. And of course, then on the other side you have the Republicans who come up and say that they are for a constitutional government, and that they want a government that is more individualistic. They want things that are closer to the ideals embodied within the Constitution. So I figured that we should, at a minimum, take a look at three key amendments in the Constitution that really sum up the values that we see in that we think are basic to democratic principles, and then we will sort of parse the news out in the context of these three amendments here. So the First Amendment is the most basic of the amendments, and this has to do with free speech, and it gives you the freedom of religion. But I isolate it down to particularly free speech, because once you have free speech, then basically everything else kind of stems from there. So free speech is the basic; it's the fulcrum of everything, and then you can move out from there. So the First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. Well, if you look at DCA, you look at SOPA, you look at Protect IP, you look at all of the attempts by Congress to step in and regulate what you can and can't say. And then you see that the First Amendment has already, under the DCA since 1990, since the invention of the emergence of the DCA, that the United States has done away with the First Amendment. And you will see on both the Democrat side and the Republican side support for the DCA. So the First Amendment has now been struck out, and it's effectively gone. When you hear them talking about hate speech on CNN and a variety of other channels, and what someone can and can't say on the air, That's a further restriction of free speech, and again, you'll see it on both the left and the right. You will see a tossing out of the First Amendment. Then the Second Amendment comes up, and this is the one that a lot of people really get confused with. And the Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, this was a lot of the time. This is sort of misconstrued, and particularly by the left, as saying that people can't have guns. That this is a state thing. That it is something that has to do with the government, and it's not. That's actually not the case at all. It actually goes much further than the Republicans. It's not even simply a matter of having the right to bear arms. What this says, and this is where the Second Amendment comes into, is it says that, and this is where it kind of recognizes things, that that the militia and this right to bear arms is understood as a revolutionary clause. And the people who wrote this Constitution, the American Constitution, let's not forget, were revolutionaries themselves, and put in and kept in a lot of these revolutionary ideas that should a government then take a stranglehold on the American people, rather than having the military controlled by the government, there needed to be a second level of military on the personal level, a second level of militia that can counter and attack an oppressing state. So the Second Amendment is about state oppression of the people and the means to fight against it. Free speech says, say as much as you want. Once free speech starts to be curtailed and you no longer have free speech, you do now move down to the Second Amendment, and the Second Amendment comes to fallback. If you can't say things, now is when you have to start picking up arms, and this is when the shooting begins. And this is what the Second Amendment says. It says that if the state is oppressing you, if you're being oppressed, you have the right to protect yourself. You have the right to protect your property. You have to protect your freedom, your freedoms. And if these freedoms are infringed upon, you have the right to take up and bear arms against those who are perpetrating these acts of oppression against you. So theoretically speaking, from a strictly constitutional point of view, given what's going on at the TSA and at the borders, there isn't any reason why, that constitutionally speaking, that an American citizen couldn't pick up a gun and, if he's being molested by a TSA guard, shoot and kill the TSA guard. And because he's going to have to he's going to obviously bring a lot of the attention onto himself and a lot of these other police and other agencies that are part of the government apparatus, will join in and protect the person who was who is oppressing the person fighting for their freedom. Then these people can be acted against as well. In other words, it is now constitutional to pick up arms against the police and authorities who state that they have authority over us, particularly when you have someone like a city inspector or a health inspector with a uniformed police officer with a gun at the side, and he's saying, I have to come onto your property, and says that he has an authority to come onto your property. Well, the thing is that the Second Amendment gives you the right now, if this threat is presented to you, to take up arms, deadly arms, and use lethal force against these people who are intruding upon your property, who are intruding upon your civil liberties, who are intruding upon your freedoms. And this is the specifics of the Second Amendment. It's a revolutionary clause, and it's further backed up by the Fourth Amendment, that it says here, and this is where the right to security comes in. The right of the people to secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable search and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon the probable cause supported by the oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched, and the persons or the things to be seized. In other words, unless there is a probable cause and clearly demonstrated in the courts beyond a reasonable doubt that a place needs to be searched or something needs to be seized, then the authorities really don't have the authority is not given to them. In other words, when the law is written that says a police officer, you must show ID to a police officer or else you'll be arrested for obstruction of justice or obstructing of a police officer. That law is unconstitutional. It violates the Fourth Amendment because it says that you don't have to do such thing. The Fourth Amendment, the Constitution, says you don't have to present such things. It also says that if the police officer who was supposed to be acting and protecting your rights and freedoms steps over this bound, he is no longer within the Constitution. Therefore, he is no longer lawful. And as such, is now considered to be an offending opponent who can be dealt with by the Second Amendment using lethal force or lethal means in order to protect and secure your rights and freedoms. This is how the Second and Fourth Amendments work, and they actually work in conjunction with one another. Yet we see on a regular and continual basis an attack on both the Second Amendment and the Fourth Amendment, particularly by the Democrats, who say that we need to have less of a gun society, and that the police and the courts are there to protect us, and that we the people don't have the right to step in and take the law into our own hands. But this is exactly what the Second and Fourth Amendment says, that the law is not authorized by the government. The law is authorized by the people. And the law stays within the people. As soon as the law goes against the people, then the law is unconstitutional and therefore unlawful. But you have a lot of Constitution professors, including people who like Barack Obama, who study constitutional law, who have these strong socialists and are trying to tweak and change the American conversation so that it becomes more socialist. So that is the government doing things. Now, the Republicans on the other side will say, "Oh," and they'll bring up these points. They'll bring up the points of the right to bear arms. They'll bring the points up unreasonable search and seizure. But on the other hand, what they'll do is they'll now turn around and say, "Oh, by the way, we need to secure our borders." And you've heard this from the Republicans talking about the going after the illegal aliens and protecting the borders and so on and so forth. And it's basically a xenophobic position, an unfortunate xenophobic position of the Republicans at large, where they now turn around again for their own purposes now, begin to violate the Constitution. Because the Constitution, if you're a free person, is not restricted to American citizens, but to anyone who stands up and says they're free. This is the anthem. This is the identity of a free person. But once again, we see on the Republican side, we see a rejection of the ideals and the unfettered freedoms given inside of the Constitution. And again, it's for their own reason, but what they say is it has to do with national security. And this is why the TSA, ironically, is being pushed by the Republicans. And a lot of the security stuff, the security aspects of the internet bills, including DCA and stuff like that, all are being pushed by the Republicans. And why are they being pushed by the Republicans? Because they say, well, this has to do with national security. This is a security issue. But yet, if you sit down and you read the Constitution, and again we go over the Second and Fourth Amendment, then the security issues don't lie with the state, as the Republicans are asserting, but lie still within the people. And we see this in the airline situation where, if we go back and look at the threats that brought in the TCA at the airports and the very un-American and treasonous behavior of the TSA guards and the police who are supporting them. What you see is that in every case, it was the citizens on the plane, and this is still true even in the case on JetBlue, it was the citizens on the plane, the people. This is where the restraint, this is where the enforcement of security, the protection of freedom, the protection of security, the protection of the right to self-defense, this is where this all came in from. It didn't come and be imposed upon by that. They didn't sit back and wait for the state to act. This was something that they took a reasonable action and did it themselves. And what happens is that we've gotten to a point now, particularly in our legal system, that the legal system no longer has any form of common sense or sense of reason. The courts, by definition, if you look, because they no longer have reason and common sense, are now fundamentally, by definition, insane. It's lots, the courts, the judicial system, the jurisprudence has lost its mind. And can no longer distinguish between fantasy and fiction, between reason and non-reason, between reality and not reality. And this sort of plays out, and as I went through the various different shows, the political shows on CNN and Fox. These are the two primary channels I'm looking at right now. I have, on the CNN side, I'm looking at Aaron Burnett and Anderson Cooper primarily. And then on the other side, on Fox, I'm looking at the O'Reilly factor. Both these sides, if you look at them, represent each side. They're fairly typical on each side. Aaron Burnett, very calm, really doesn't do a lot of what I call creative journalism, where she's starting to create a story. When I look at the O'Reilly factor, he doesn't do too much in terms of creation, but he does have his opinions. The one who is the worst offender of the three shows is Anderson Cooper. And Anderson Cooper, almost on a continuous basis, no matter what the topic is out there creating these stories. And this is not a story that a journalist sort of happens on and studies and reads up on and sort of learns what's going on. This is a story, an issue that is pushed by the journalist. It's the issue and concern is created by the journalist. And Anderson Cooper is guilty of this in bucket loads. Almost in every show, he steps forward and steps into this. The next thing he's stepped in now and made a huge issue out of is this whole race study based on this the Trayvon Martin case. He's gone on to this whole race baiting issue, and this is sort of what Obama does. Obama and the Democrats use this race baiting, the divide between white and black, which is really irrelevant and obsolete now. Given the amount of people around the world who have access to the internet, who have access to jobs and so on and so forth, there is no longer the black-white divide anymore. The black-white divide is primarily a waspish white European concern. It is not a global concern. The global concern is a lot more intricate. It's a lot more diverse than Anderson Cooper or any of the people that these psychologists that did the report really understand. I mean, they really seem to be locked into this microcosm. And what they were doing today, and I'll go into how they did the race baiting a little bit later. But what they were doing, and they're basing it on this whole Trayvon Martin case, And this is kind of how they get into things. In the Trayvon Martin case, they're fixated. Anderson Cooper is now fixated on these audio tapes. And to be fair, this stuff continues on CNN on Jane Velez Mitchell and a lot of these other Nancy Grace, a lot of these other what I call witch hunt media lynching shows. These are all tabloid, aiming at the lowest common denominator, really trying to hype up particular criminal issues, what they consider, and it's all hype. It's a lot of speculation, and there's really not a lot of fact behind it. It's really, in many cases, there's so much speculation that any amount of evidence that is presented is completely washed out and lost. And I'll give you an example of this. We were talking yesterday about the audio analysis of the 911 calls. And we were talking about how they bring on these experts, and when you sit down and you start studying, you go behind what the experts are saying and how they got their information, you find that these experts they're not really experts. They're people who operate these softwares, who run the software does most of the work. They don't do, and they'll swear on their reputation. Both what's his name is Tom Owen and Ed Primu, whatever his name is, Primu. Both of these people stated on their reputations that they had years of experience in audio analysis, and that they knew for sure that the calls for help on the tape was not George Zimmerman. When you go into the analysis, the only one who actually showed the analysis and went into a bit of detail into how the analysis was done, but he kind of glossed over it. You really had to be careful and catch this. It's based on a probability model. It's not based. The software doesn't match it up identically. They give you the software gives you a probability of match, and there could be a number of reasons for why you get a match or not get a match. And they were showing that, and this is where he showed on that even if you're playing the same, you get the same track and you compare one track to the other, the same two tracks that you have, the same audio samples. And if you compare the same audio samples together, back to back, that the software will only give you a 99% certainty ratio, leaving a 1% probability for error. So this gives you a calibration that even with identical samples, that the software will produce errors. When he was asked what was the result on the 911 calls, the screaming for help, the result popped up as 48%. In other words, this software did no better job at identifying the voice and making a conclusion as if the guy had flipped a coin, heads or tails. That's 50% there. That's the probability there of flipping a coin. That's 50%. Did no better than this, and he's now stating that on his reputation that this was not George Zimmerman. And so the only qualification, the only argument this guy is giving for his expertise is, trust me, I know. And the thing is that if you've seen these experts who've popped up for the Iraq War, if you saw these experts that have popped up for a lot of other things that did not go according to plan, and found out later to be lies, you find that a lot of these experts who are on the air are saying that they know what they know and should be trusted simply because of who they are, that you can't do this. This is the wrong way. This is in no way journalism. And the thing is, when you went and study what this other guy had done, they had a second analyst take a look at this. He refused to give his results. And then at the end, after he was saying how sure he was about it, he said, well, by the way, if you have different calls on, different soundtracks from different things, it's very difficult to determine one track from another. So in other words, the only way he would have been able to certain whose voice it was calling for help was if they had another person, they both George Zimmerman, a sample from George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin in the alleyway or whatever between the houses, calling for help, and had that same voice sample over the phone to 911. If that voice sample from both these people would have been, then they could have done. Otherwise, the samples were too different to have any degree of conclusion, and that's why the Tom Owens analysis only produced a 50% match, or a 50% probability that these voices were the same. In other words, the uncertainty was so high that it was like flipping a coin. But again, they continued pushing forward with this, and I call this looking for Satan in the audio tracks, because this was done early on in the days when you had record players, when you had everything was played on vinyl. People would be playing these tracks backwards, listening for satanic messages. This same type of method of listening for garbled up words it's seen in UFOs. It's seen in looking for Bigfoot. It's seen in looking for ghosts. If you watch these ghost hunter stories, these same techniques are used. CNN brings it up, trots this thing up on Anderson Cooper again, and they're listening for the term fucking coons. And doesn't matter how they've rigged it or how they've done the analysis. What you hear on the tape is so open to interpretation that you can't really determine exactly what's being said. And even at the end of it, after all these teasers saying, oh, we've got new evidence, and talking about this whole racial divide, the question now comes up, was he saying coons or was it cold? And they can't decide between the two, so it ends up being inconclusive in terms of the end overall results. But again, they don't spend the time saying this. This is sort of something that trails off at the end as, oh, by the way, all the evidence we just showed you and our certainty, it's all not really that certain. We're not really, it's all here or there. And again, what they've done is they've created an issue, they've created an environment around this, again, all based on race. And what we see on this is we see both sides of the political aisle, and this is Obama, and on the Republican side, picking sides on this. And the whole thing that Obama and the political establishment has picked on is the gun control law. It's all about, again, this whole issue over the Second and Fourth Amendment. This is the battle that's going on now. Trayvon Martin is not the issue anymore for the politicians. It's the Second and Fourth Amendment. That's the issue. The Obama socialists want everything done by the government, and Republicans say, no way, that people have the right to their guns. They, have a right to bear arms, and argue that the Second Amendment states this, even though the Second Amendment actually goes further and stands against the TSA and the actions of the TSA, and allows for the use of deadly force against the TSA and any officer of the law, any officer of the government who is in his duty violating the Constitution, violating a person's constitutional rights, particularly within the Second and Fourth Amendment. In other words, if officer in the commission of his duty is violating the Fourth Amendment, the person who is being violated has the right to use the Second Amendment in order to defend himself. But again, this is sort of, this is kind of glossed over by the political right because, again, they are more security conscious and they don't want people standing up against the law and authority. They are, as in many cases, are as the social democrats are, the social left are. They are as authority oriented as are the social democrats. It's just for different reasons. The draconianness, the Orwellian behavior is the same. It's just from different points of view. And we'll talk more about this when we come to the second half of Headlines and Beyond, when we get into foreign affairs.